Oh, hello. I did not see you there. Welcome to this experimental prattle slash rant where we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Um, so, in particular, we're going to talk about character creation, and this is meant to be a guide to theoretical new players or just a way to go back to first principles about character building. Because I actually see a lot of this sort of advice as kind of being very thin on the ground, and with not enough just like examples start to finish of the character creation process. So that's one thing I might do a few times is build narrate the process of building a character. Um, and I do think that some of this is important because this is going to sound gatekeepery and grognardy, but okay, teenagers. You know how it seems like every teenager goes through the same process despite being a special snowflake? Where they all wear black for a bit, then get really into 70s music, and then they dye their hair purple and spend a week or two being demi-pan asexual despite never actually having gone on a date with anyone yet. New D&D players have a similar process. One thing I've noticed is a phase where they get really into oddball races and monstrous player characters, or they get really fixated on recreating some existing fictional character as their character. The archetypical example of both is all the various Drizzt clones, but I've personally seen Dante from Devil May Cry try to be implemented in 3.5 for some reason, and I'm sure that as of late there have been a lot of totally not Geralt of Rivia's running around. Everyone goes through this. All you can do is try to get players through this phase and out the other side of it as quickly as possible, and hope that the bad habits don't stick. My tentative plan here is to make two series, one for DMing, which will be called The Care and Feeding of Gazebos. This one right here is player-focused, and I don't know what pretentious name I'm going to give it yet. But now that everyone's good and offended, we're going to get to the subject of character creation. Here's a big mistake that most character creation guides make. They start in completely the wrong way. And it's hard to blame them because the book itself encourages these mistakes. The book starts out with a character concept thing, and then lists the steps in order of 1, pick a race, 2, pick a class, 3, determine ability scores, 4, discover character, equipment, come together, etc. I vehemently disagree, because step 0 is ask the DM what kind of campaign it's going to be. It's so important, and it gets forgotten about so often. When characters are conceived of in a vacuum, they sometimes wind up not quite fitting into the game they wind up being played in. Or there's this lost opportunity because there were things in the setting that would have been really great and fun, but no one knew that they were there, so they never took advantage of them. And what I'm talking about isn't just the setting either, whether it's some homebrewed thing, or it's Dark Sun, or Eberron, or Forgotten Realms, or Greyhawk, or yada yada yada. It's also about like the particular sort of game being made within those settings. Because I mean, with Eberron, you could be making a very like Indiana Jones, like pulpy, like dungeon crawly sort of thing, or you could make something very political, or you could go straight up very heavy on the noir investigative end of it. Let's see here. Example. Let's say someone conceives of a character as a very classical Conan style barbarian, or not even necessarily Conan, but just the Flanderized version of Conan. Loincloth, great axe, etc. Smash and plunder. Let's say you bring that character, and it turns out that the DM is a huge Game of Thrones fan, and he's actually going to have a more political, intriguey campaign in a very Celtic / British Isles inspired world. Well, your smash and grab barbarian might not have as much to do in that campaign. Or if you'd known this before and you still wanted to be a barbarian, you could build your entire concept around being this out of place foreigner. But maybe instead of being Grothbar Bloodcleaver, you'd rather be Mad Jack O'Hannigan, the fast-talking, unpredictable, screaming mad lad from Ireland, whose brash attitude hides an uncanny judge of character, which will especially help out during the murder mysteries that said DM is known for including heavily. Or let's say you're a warlock, but you're not sure what pact you want to go with. Asking the DM will go a long way for that, because if it's me, then if I'm the DM, then I'm going to have tentacle monsters, and if you like it makes sense to make it so that your warlock pact like dovetails with the supernatural themes of the game. Yeah. So getting the DM to talk about his campaign shouldn't be too hard. The hard part will be getting him to shut up, but you don't need to know the deep lore of the setting. You just need to know the general tech level and sort of the broad ideas for the sort of game he's going to play, to give you some ideas. It's the difference between if you know that it's going to involve no wilderness exploration, then that might change your desire to be a ranger, or it might make you want to focus your ranger a bit more in a different direction. Also, the setting might have something setting specific that's really, really cool. Like the equivalent of Witchers, for example. Or like Hell Knights in the Pathfinder setting, or the Harpers, or the Pathfinders in the Pathfinder setting. What's here now? Framing devices are a thing as well. I think that's very important for character creation to make a game that really has legs. What races are in the setting, and which races are also likely to be heavily featured. The setting might have elves, but the DM might plan on doing absolutely nothing with elves beyond as the occasional incidental character, where he has an interlude specifically set in like dwarven homelands or something. That might change whether or not you want to be a dwarf and how much effort you want to put into your like background. The given race could be different in that setting. I once had someone describe his Dragonborn, how he implemented them in his setting. He described them as like the Turks in relation to medieval Europe. So his Dragonborn were often proud foreigners from a distant land with a deep history that's not currently trying to conquer you, but he's very confident that his culture is superior and everything is better back home. And also, he'd always be unfavorably comparing everything to how they do it in Draxtanbull. Yeah, in Draxtanbull, we have sewers under the streets, not in them. Speaking of race, let's get back to the stages for character creation. After talking to the DM, I would pick class first, not race. Most of your experience playing the game is going to be determined by the class you pick, not your race. Characters are defined by what they do, not what they are, and you should devote the most time to picking the thing that's going to affect your experience the most. Also, I do have a personal preference that unless there's a compelling reason for a character to not be human, you should pick human. Picking a fantasy race can sometimes be a crutch that stops you from actually coming up with a personality or a real concept for your character. And the horrific race bloat back in 3.5 kind of gave me PTSD. Spell scales. Also, a good setting has enough different human nations and cultures to still have plenty of, diversity in the party composed of nothing but humans. Going humans only for a setting can make for more compelling villains too. They're more interesting and relatable instead of monstrous monstrous cannon fodder stuff. Look at Black Company. Humans are fully capable of being their own orcs. They don't need orcs in that setting. The humans got that covered. Also, in 5th edition, feats can be really, really powerful, and you can build an entire character around a feat, and they can really switch on a character. So having that feat available from first level as a human can be a pretty big deal depending on what kind of build you're going for. I also think that character building should be done at least partially in a group from the start, so everyone can bounce ideas off of each other and build characters that have interesting interactions. And I don't think they should all agree. I mean, they should disagree in interesting ways instead of awkward ways. Nature-focused characters like rangers and druids are often the culprit in this because their goals and worldview can fail to intersect with that of a lot of other party members. But if you build the character around that, assuming they'll be the outsider, or if you have the other characters also be from a rural background and treat them and wind up treating those characters the way they would treat a cleric or a paladin, to be honest, that can also make for a very interesting party as well. As to picking a class and other character details, I have two separate methods, which I stole from Mark Rosewater's talks about designing magic cards: bottom-up design and top-down design. Top-down design is where you start with a very clear creative concept for a character, then try to represent that as close as you can using the game's rules. Bottom-up is where you start with a build or mechanical strategy you find interesting, and then allow a character to emerge from that. Neither is necessarily better than the other, and both have failure modes, and both of them can wind up arriving at the same thing. Bottom Down's drawback is that people can try to recreate existing fictional characters and wind up spreading their character too thin, or you wind up shoehorning in stuff that doesn't quite work. It's like you're ice skating uphill against the rules of the game. For example, there's really no good way to represent Geralt of Rivia in 5th edition if you want to be really, really, really true to it. You're basically going to have to give up the alchemy because there isn't a really good alchemy thing for that. You could go Eldritch Knight Fighter, but where's his tracking abilities? There's no alchemy potion stuff. He's supposed to be a super killy murder machine and a roided up alchemist and a combat wizard. Such a character is trying to do too many things at once for no good reason. Another example would be the 3rd edition ranged rogue. It just doesn't work as well as being a not ranged rogue. Bow-wielding rogue just isn't that good. The ranger class itself has kind of always been a victim of top-down design, even though I do love it. Now, bottom-up's failure mode is a generic character with nothing narratively compelling about them, or a nonsensical background to represent being a multi-class warlock paladin. This is, I think Pun is an example of this, or most super duper heavily optimized characters wind up having not much actual personality or character to them because that's not where all the effort went. The various hybrid classes that Pathfinder introduced later in its run might be examples of this. They're interesting mechanically, but fluff-wise, they don't have a lot of deep resonance to them. Psionics in 3.5 also is really mechanically interesting and elegant, but it doesn't have that huge background of fantasy resonance to go off of. Now, when actually building a character and selecting their skills and class features, here's a tool I use. Remember the 3 pillars of gameplay? Combat, role-playing, and exploration? When I build a character, I ask myself, what is this character going to do when each of these pillars comes up? Now, they can be very much focused on one or the other, but they should never have nothing to do, because that results in idle time at the table. We want to maximize the amount of quality time we have actually playing the game, remember? You can build an optimized murder machine, but what does that murder machine do when there aren't things to murder? Well, the player pulls out a smartphone or goes to grab another Coke or something. Which can be okay. It's okay for some players to be way more into role-playing than others, and to let them take the spotlight. But you don't want to consistently have some of your players checked out for 50% of an evening. So I always give my characters skills or spells that will allow them to do something during role-playing and exploration time. Because obviously, you still wind up paying a lot of attention to combat. I'm going to go through an example character concept. And what's fun about this one is that it can be arrived at from both directions, top-down or bottom-up. Let's say we want to make a fighter, because 5e fighters are actually fun. Obviously, we're going to plan on going Battlemaster, because that's the coolest one. duh. And our goal is to make a resilient, damage-dealing character that can also manipulate the battlefield and synergize with himself and with the party. I could see going 2-weapon fighting for the combat style, since it gives you something to do with your bonus action, and then you could even spend your feet on dual wielder or charger. That's getting into like super optimized area. Because once you get action surge and your maneuvers, the idea is to knock the target prone with your first attack, then go Nova on them with as many additional attacks as you can get. All of them are going to be an advantage. Another possible way to go with that one would be Great Weapon Master, and using the advantage you're getting to offset that -5 to hit penalty. Same concept, fewer attacks now, slightly, but you're doing like way more damage with them. Would be particularly good if someone in the party has a way of buffing your accuracy further with like Bless or something. So we know what we'll be doing in combat. Smashing faces. What about exploring? Well, we've got a high strength, and athletics is a class skill for fighters, so climb and jump and lift heavy objects. That's easy. We can do stuff. What about role-playing? Well, in this particular situation, let's say the party already has a sorcerer who's proficient in persuasion and has a high charisma and likes to be the face of the group. So you know he's going to be taking charge in that a lot. But what the group doesn't actually have is a scallywag. No one in the group is a ne'er-do-well. Even the monk is stealthy, but he's not sneaky. So there's an open niche we can fill. We take the criminal background for deception. And just for fun, we take proficiency in disguise as our human bonus skill. When we come to ability scores, we take a not terrible charisma, 12 or 13, and we forget about wisdom and intelligence, 10 and 10 at most, maybe even dump wisdom down to 9. Who does this sound like? A clueless scallywag who's good at lying, says he's the greatest swordsman who's ever lived, and strangely convincing when dressed in drag? It's Mad Mardigan. We just made Mad Mardigan from Willow. And the thing is that if you went into this like saying, I want to play a character like Mad Mardigan, you could arrive at something very similar. Battlemaster fighter with a decent charisma and everything else kind of sucks, and ranks in deception and, of course, disguise. On another note, if you're, as I kind of said earlier, if you're not super confident on taking the spotlight, there's still things you can do during role playing. You can do is take a skill like Insight, so you can sort of be the party's lie detector or designated judge of character, and you don't have to put yourself out there and come up with funny quips to say. You can you can still be useful to the party in those situations. So yeah, that's my that's my character. That's my philosophy on character creation. I like to make something that is that fits into the setting and fits into the rest of the party and into the planned campaign fairly well, or interacts with it interestingly. I start with class first. Don't pay much attention to race. And I like to build a character that has stuff to do no matter what is going on. Oh yeah, one thing I used to think about a lot is, especially with like when picking spells, I would think, what do I do if my character has their gear taken away? Sometimes I'll throw in some skills or some build selections that work even when your character is naked. I know it's unpopular, but as a DM, I do occasionally like to stick players in situations where they where they're stuck going back to using where they can't rely on their gear and they have to improvise. But I know that's unpopular. So yeah, there it is. There's my view on character creation. Feel free to comment and say how much how dumb I am and how much I suck. I fully expect that, but yeah. Thank you for listening.